It was supposed to be a peaceful flight, a simple trip home with her emotional support dog curled at her feet. But the moment she stepped onto that plane, everything changed. Whispers, stares, and a steward's cold glare turned comfort into humiliation. By the time the seatbelt sign turned off, she'd be publicly shamed, accused of lying, and nearly forced off the flight. What made her presence and her dog such a threat? And why did no one speak up when it mattered most? Her name was Danielle Moore, a 32-year-old therapist who spent her days helping others find calm amid their storms. Ironically, she was the one now searching for peace. After a year of anxiety and burnout, she finally decided to visit her mother in Atlanta, a trip meant to heal her spirit. Her loyal emotional support dog, Luna, had been her anchor through sleepless nights and quiet tears. That morning, everything felt normal. Danielle double-checked Luna's travel papers, arrived early, and smiled politely at the airline staff. She'd flown many times before, never once questioned, never once treated differently. But this time something felt off, a subtle shift in energy. The ticket agent's forced smile, the lingering eyes from passengers in line. Still, she brushed it off. "Maybe I'm overthinking," she whispered to herself, clutching Luna's leash a little tighter. The gate attendant scanned her boarding pass but hesitated just long enough to make her uneasy. Then came the comment, casual, coated in politeness but sharp enough to sting. "Ma'am, are you sure this is a service animal?" It was the tone, not the words. The kind that said you don't belong here. As she walked down the narrow jet bridge, her heartbeat quickened. The air grew colder, heavier, like a warning she couldn't quite explain. She didn't know it yet, but that flight would become a lesson in how quickly dignity can be stripped away, and how silence, from those who see it happen, can hurt even more than the injustice itself. As Danielle entered the cabin, her smile was met with silence. The flight attendants were courteous to the passengers ahead of her, warm greetings, polite nods, but when her turn came, the tone changed. A quick glance at Luna, a flicker of judgment, and a forced, "Please find your seat quickly." It was subtle, but sharp enough to leave a mark. She settled in near the middle aisle, careful to keep Luna close. The dog lay quietly at her feet, calm and well-trained. But before the plane even left the gate, a steward approached. "Ma'am, your animal needs to be in a carrier." Danielle explained calmly that Luna was an emotional support dog with all required documentation. She offered the papers she'd already shown twice that morning. The attendant took them, barely skimmed, and sighed, loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. Moments later, a woman across the aisle leaned over and whispered to her husband. Another passenger pointed toward Luna. The whispers grew, feeding the tension that thickened the air. Danielle felt the heat rise to her cheeks, that familiar cocktail of shame and anger. She wasn't just being questioned. She was being watched. 10 minutes passed before the attendant returned, this time with another crew member. "Ma'am, we've had some complaints," the second one said, not meeting her eyes. "People are uncomfortable with the dog." Danielle froze. Luna hadn't moved, hadn't barked, hadn't even looked up. The only thing that seemed to bother anyone was the color of the hand holding the leash. She tried to steady her breathing as a manager from the gate entered the cabin. The hum of curious voices filled the space, a chorus of judgment disguised as concern. The gate manager knelt beside her, his voice low but firm. "If your animal causes disruption, we may have to ask you to deplane." Danielle's pulse quickened. "Disruption?" The irony burned. The only disturbance came from those questioning her right to exist here, to travel with the same dignity others took for granted. She wanted to defend herself, to speak up, but years of learned restraint held her still. Outside the window, rain began to streak the glass, and the low rumble of thunder echoed in her chest. Luna rested her head on Danielle's shoe, sensing her unease. That small gesture, quiet, loyal, unbothered, became her only anchor amid the rising storm of humiliation. Passengers' eyes lingered longer now. Some pretended not to notice, others recorded discreetly with their phones. Yet not one person spoke in her defense. The cabin felt colder, tighter, like the air itself was judging her. As the engines roared to life and the plane began to taxi, Danielle stared straight ahead, her mind spinning. She had done everything right, every rule, every regulation. But the truth was becoming painfully clear. Sometimes no amount of compliance protects you when prejudice decides otherwise. She didn't know it yet, but this confrontation was far from over. The worst part wasn't behind her. It was still waiting at 35,000 feet, where silence would be louder than any words she could say. The plane had reached cruising altitude, but Danielle couldn't shake the feeling of being on display. Every small movement drew eyes. Every sound from Luna seemed amplified by 100 stares. She tried to focus on her breathing. In, out, calm. But calm doesn't stand a chance when you're being quietly judged for existing. Then came the announcement. A flight attendant's voice cut through the cabin. "Would the passenger in seat 14B please secure her animal? It's become a distraction to others." The words pierced like glass. Every head turned. Danielle froze as if she'd been exposed for something she didn't do. Luna was silent, still resting obediently at her feet. There was no barking, no movement, nothing. But now all eyes were on her. She felt the heat rise in her chest, the sting of humiliation crawling up her throat. The attendant approached, this time flanked by a supervisor. They didn't speak softly. They didn't care who heard. "Ma'am, we'll need you to place the dog under the seat or we'll have to remove you from the flight." Danielle's voice trembled as she tried to explain. But the moment she spoke, she knew they weren't listening. The tone wasn't about policy. It was punishment disguised as procedure. A man across the aisle muttered something under his breath. Another chuckled. The sound of quiet complicity filled the cabin like static, and then came the breaking point. Luna whimpered softly, sensing her owner's distress. The attendant snapped, "See? That's exactly the problem." Danielle's heart cracked. Tears blurred her vision as she realized she wasn't fighting for space on an airplane. She was fighting for her dignity in a place where it had already been denied. No one spoke. Not the passengers. Not the crew. Just the endless hum of the engines, drowning out her silence. As the flight continued, Danielle sat motionless, hands trembling, eyes fixed on the seat ahead. She finally understood. This wasn't about a dog or a rule. This was about a woman who didn't fit the image they thought belonged in that seat. When the plane landed, Danielle waited until every passenger had left before standing up. The aisle that once felt too narrow now seemed endless. The flight attendants avoided her eyes. Not one of them said a word. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just the quiet efficiency of people eager to forget what had happened. She stepped off the aircraft holding Luna's leash, her chest tight but her head high. Outside the terminal window, planes took off into the gray sky, symbols of freedom that, for her, suddenly felt heavy with limits. The humiliation she endured wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet, procedural, and hidden beneath polite smiles, the kind of racism that lives comfortably in places where cameras don't always reach. In the days that followed, Danielle wrote a detailed complaint to the airline. The reply was predictable. "We take these matters seriously." No names. No accountability. Just corporate words crafted to protect an image. But this time she didn't delete it and move on. She posted her experience online, not for sympathy but for truth. And in hours her story reached thousands. People shared their own encounters, their own moments of silent humiliation in airports, stores, classrooms. Danielle realized something powerful. Racism doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. And those whispers echo in the lives of those who've been told to stay calm or not make it about race. Luna lay beside her as she read hundreds of comments from strangers who finally felt seen. In their words, she found strength, not just for herself, but for the countless others who had stayed silent out of fear of being dismissed. She learned that change doesn't begin with those in power. It begins with those who refuse to stay quiet. So the question isn't just what happened to Danielle that day, it's how many more times this story has unfolded, unseen, unspoken, and unanswered, in the skies above us.